In the quiet halls of a military hospital, a humble janitor once forgotten by the world faces a danger no one saw coming. When 5 armed men charge toward a wounded young soldier, a little girl cries, "Daddy, please stop them." What happens next shatters identities, reunites families, and exposes a secret buried for 20 years. This is the story of a quiet hero, a daughter's innocence, and the miracle that begins the moment the past finally returns. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above the long, polished hallway of Norfolk Military Medical Center. Just after 6 a.m., the building rested in that rare, delicate calm before the day truly began. Before orders echoed, boots struck the floor, and the endless rhythm of military life took over. Michael Hayes preferred this hour more than any other. He pushed his mop bucket forward, the quiet squeak of the wheels, the only sound breaking the stillness. To anyone who passed, he was simply the janitor with the tired boots and the worn green coveralls, a man who kept his head down, a man who stayed invisible. But for Michael, invisibility wasn't a burden, it was a shield. He dipped the mop into the water, lifted it, and let it glide across the smooth tiles in long, patient strokes. The simple motion calmed him, the way breathing exercises used to steady him inside helicopters, buffeted by desert winds. He didn't miss that life, not the part that left scars, not the part that carved holes in men's souls. Now, everything he did revolved around one purpose. Lily. Just thinking of her brought a quiet warmth to his chest. His little girl with her soft blonde hair and her stuffed bunny named Hope, because Lily believed every bunny needed a name that made people smile. She had insisted on that, with the stubborn innocence only a child could possess. Michael checked his watch. Another 30 minutes before Lily woke up in the small on-base daycare room, where he left her during early shifts. She'd wander sleepily toward the window to wait for him bunny in hand, the way she always did. That image alone kept him steady. It grounded him in ways the Navy never could. He moved to the next section of the hallway, and that was when he felt it. A shift in the air, the soft whisper of boots approaching, light but purposeful. Too rhythmic to belong to a wandering patient or a casual visitor. Michael didn't turn his head, but the muscles at the back of his neck tightened. Instinct wasn't something a man like him could turn off. It lived inside him, a silent companion, always listening, always measuring. A figure appeared at the far end of the hallway, a young military officer female wearing fatigues that were dusted with the sand-colored grit of recent training. Her hair was tied back, loosely curls bouncing slightly as she walked. Her uniform bore the name Lane stitched above the chest. She looked tense. Not outwardly, her posture was trained, disciplined, but her eyes scanned the hallway with the focus of someone who'd been followed too many times in life to ignore the feeling now. Lane didn't see him immediately. Most people didn't. They glanced past Michael the way people glance past background noise. But when she finally met his eyes, she paused just for a second. There was something strangely familiar in that pause, though neither of them could place it not yet. "Morning," she said, polite but brisk. Michael nodded once. "Ma'am." His voice stayed low, steady, non-threatening, ordinary the way he preferred. Lane continued walking, but after a few steps, her pace faltered. Her hand drifted unconsciously toward her side, where a faded bruise peeked beneath the sleeve. Michael noticed his eyes caught such details automatically, but he knew better than to ask. It wasn't his business. Except, something about her didn't sit right. Something in the air carried a tension he hadn't felt in years, the kind that slid under doors, the kind that lingered before trouble arrived. Lane's steps quickened. She didn't look back, but her breathing sharpened just slightly. Michael silently shifted his stance, not enough for anyone to notice, but enough that he could react quickly if he needed to. Old habits. Old ghosts. Then came the echo. Not boots this time. Footsteps. Heavy. Coordinated. 5 of them. The sound bounced through the hallway like a warning. It wasn't military stride, too aggressive, too fast. Men who were used to chasing. Men who had a target. Michael tightened his grip on the mop handle. His heartbeat stayed calm, eerily calm, like still water before a storm. The 5 men rounded the corner in tight formation. Black shirts, broad shoulders. Expressionless faces that moved with a predator's confidence. Lane finally realized she was no longer alone. Her eyes flicked back. She froze. Michael saw it before she spoke. The calculation of danger, the recognition of threat, the sudden wobble in her stance as pain from her injury surged back through her body. And then, "Daddy, please stop them." The small voice came from behind him. Michael turned, and there she was. Lily. Standing at the doorway of the adjacent hallway, clutching hope. The bunny with both hands, eyes wide and full of fear. She must have woken early and wandered down to find him the way she sometimes did when she got scared of being alone. Her voice echoed down the corridor with heartbreaking urgency. Lane stiffened. The 5 men smirked. And something deep inside Michael, something he had buried under layers of quiet routines and simple days, snapped awake like a blade unsheathed. He felt it in his bones, first then in his breath, then in the way the world narrowed into sharp detail. The angle of the men's shoulders, the way they spread out, the distance to Lily, the fear in Lane's eyes, the echo of Lily's plea. "Daddy." Michael released the mop handle. It clattered softly to the floor. For the first time in years, the quiet janitor let the warrior breathe, and the hallway suddenly felt much too small for what was about to happen. For a single heartbeat, the hallway fell into absolute silence, an unnatural stillness hanging between the fluorescent lights and the polished floor. It was the kind of silence that came just before a storm breaks open, when even the air seems to brace itself. Lane's breath hitched. She wasn't prepared, not in her injured state, not alone, and certainly not against 5 men built like they had traded their humanity for muscle and violence. Her hand instinctively reached for the sidearm holster that wasn't there. She had surrendered it earlier for medical evaluation after her training accident. Bad timing. Worst luck. But nothing was worse than the sound she had just heard. "Daddy, please stop them." The little girl's voice, fragile, trembling, scared, ricocheted down the hallway and hit Lane harder than any blow ever had. Lane had grown up hearing similar cries, the kind that echoed off the walls of a burning compound. 2 decades ago, echoes she had never quite outrun. She looked toward Michael. The quiet janitor was gone. Standing in his place was someone else entirely. His shoulders squared, his eyes sharpened, his steps grounded. Everything about his posture shifted in silent precision, a transformation Lane would have missed if she didn't have the instincts of someone raised in a military household. This wasn't the stance of a custodian. This was the stance of a man who had been forged in chaos and survived it. The 5 men spread into a wide arc, their heavy boots pounding the floor with confidence. Their formation wasn't random, it was tactical. Coordinated. Each positioned to cut off escape routes, like wolves corralling prey. Lane's pulse spiked. This wasn't a mugging, not a random act. These men had training, discipline, orders. One of them pointed straight at Lane. There she is. Michael took one silent step sideways, putting himself between the men and Lily. In that single motion, Lane realized something chilling and yet strangely reassuring. He wasn't afraid. Even when facing 5 threats at once, his breathing stayed slow and steady, the kind of controlled inhale only combat veterans knew how to maintain. Lane had seen elite operators move like that before, on screens, In training manuals, never this close, never in real life. The tallest man in the group sneered. "Step aside, janitor. You're not part of this." Michael didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence alone was enough to draw the man's lips into a deeper smirk, a smirk that vanished when Michael's stance subtly shifted again, grounding his weight through the floor like an anchor. Lily clutched Hope the bunny tighter, her knuckles turning white. Her eyes glimmered with tears she refused to let fall. Even at her age, she understood danger in a way no child ever should. Lane swallowed hard. Part of her wanted to shout for help, but she knew it would be useless. This hallway was isolated. Early morning shifts meant fewer personnel nearby, and these men hadn't come without a plan. They expected silence. They expected fear. They expected easy victory. What they didn't expect, what Lane hadn't expected, was Michael Hayes. The shortest of the attackers stepped forward. "Last warning. Walk away." Michael took a breath, a quiet, calm breath, and then his voice, low and steady, filled the hallway. "She's injured. She's unarmed, and you're not laying a hand on her." Lane felt something tighten in her chest. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. The kind of recognition one only feels when witnessing someone step into a role they were born for. The men exchanged amused glances. "You think you can stop us?" one scoffed. Michael didn't blink. "My daughter thinks I can." The words settled over the hallway like iron. Lane shivered, not from cold, but from the gravity of the moment. Lily's small whisper had awakened something inside this man, something lethal, something unbreakable. The biggest man cracked his knuckles a sound sharp enough to bounce off the walls. "Then be a hero, janitor. See how far that gets you." Lane's jaw clenched. She wanted to step forward to help, but her leg throbbed with every shift in weight. She couldn't even stand straight, let alone fight. The men charged. It happened fast, too fast for anyone untrained to process. But Lane saw every detail with terrifying clarity. 5 shadows lunging forward, 5 sets of hands reaching for her, 5 threats converging in a perfect storm. And then Michael moved. Not like a janitor, not like a civilian, not like a man afraid for his life. He moved like a ghost, slipping between shadows, silent and deadly in his precision. Lane had read reports about soldiers like this, men who operated behind lines, under impossible conditions, with skill sets sharpened beyond conventional limits. Yet nothing in training prepared her for the sight of someone actually doing it. Right here, 10 feet away. He sidestepped the first attacker with fluid speed, letting the man's momentum carry him too far, before driving an elbow into his throat. The man dropped, instantly choking. The second attacker didn't even finish drawing his fist back before Michael seized his wrist and twisted. Bone cracked. The man's scream cut through the hallway. The third lunged, but Michael spun, swept his legs, and sent him crashing into a glass panel that spiderwebbed on impact. Lane could hardly breathe. "Good Lord," she whispered. The last 2 paused, stunned by how quickly the first 3 had fallen, but their hesitation was fatal. Michael seized the moment. 2 strikes, 2 collapses, 2 bodies hitting the ground with echoing thuds. 5 men down. The entire hallway fell still again. Michael exhaled slowly, his fists lowering his stance, softening as if he were folding that warrior back into the quiet shell of a janitor. Lily ran to him. First, tears finally spilling over. "Daddy," he crouched, scooped her into his arms, and tucked her head against his shoulder. His voice softened instantly. "You're safe, sweetheart. I'm right here." Lane stared breathless, unable to reconcile the man kneeling gently with his daughter and the force of nature she had just witnessed. But one thought struck her hardest, one she couldn't shake. No ordinary janitor fights like that. No ordinary man moves like that. And someone like him does not simply appear by coincidence. Not in her life. Not today. Not when these men were hunting her. Something far darker was unfolding, something that connected Lane, these attackers, and the quiet father now holding his daughter. And in that moment, Lane realized with a chill, this was only the beginning. For several seconds, no one moved. The hallway felt hollowed out as if the world itself had paused to comprehend what had just happened. 5 men, trained, coordinated, ruthless, lay sprawled across the polished military flooring. Their bodies were twisted at angles that only came from precision strikes, delivered with clinical efficiency. Lane had seen combat. She had seen elite soldiers train, fail, succeed, improvise. But she had never seen anything like this. Not executed by one man. Not in under 5 seconds. Not with such terrifying quiet. Michael Hayes didn't look winded, didn't look shaken, didn't even look triumphant. He simply stood there, holding Lily close to his chest, as if the chaos around him didn't exist. But Lane saw what most people wouldn't. His hand trembled. Just once. A tremor so subtle that only someone raised by 2 admirals could recognize for what it was not. Fear, not adrenaline, but the ghost of an instinct he never wanted to resurrect. "Daddy, are you hurt?" Lily whispered against his shoulder. Michael kissed the top of her head. "I'm okay, sweetheart." "Are you okay?" She nodded, sniffled, and squeezed his shirt with both fists. Lane forced herself to inhale deeply. She winced as the air pulled at the bruised muscles in her side. But pain was better than panic. Pain grounded her. Pain reminded her she was alive. But nothing could distract her from the truth that hung thick in the air. This man, this quiet, humble janitor, had just dismantled 5 attackers with the skill of someone who once belonged to a world far deadlier than any job title suggested. Lane didn't know him, but she knew this. She owed him her life, and maybe more. Michael finally rose to standing height again, steadying Lily on his hip. Lane's gaze dropped to his hands, calloused, scarred, shaped by the kind of work that didn't involve mops or buckets. She noticed the way he positioned his feet, weight-balanced perfectly, ready to move again if needed. No civilian stood like that. She swallowed. "Are you military?" Michael didn't answer immediately. His eyes flicked toward the fallen men, first scanning for movement, confirming unconsciousness. Only when he was sure the danger was neutralized did he turn to face Lane. His voice was calm. Too calm. No, not anymore. Not anymore. 2 words that opened more questions than they answered. Lane wanted to ask more, but before she could, her injured leg buckled beneath her. She stumbled. Michael stepped forward instinctively, one arm still holding Lily the other, catching Lane before she hit the ground. Her hand gripped his forearm, solid, steady, warm. "Easy," he murmured. "You're hurt worse than you're letting on." Lane forced a breath through clenched teeth. "I can stand." But she couldn't not without him. And Michael, despite everything, didn't judge her pride. He eased her back upright, his movements careful, respectful, almost tender, in contrast to the deadly precision he'd displayed moments earlier. Lily blinked up at Lane with wide, empathetic eyes. "Miss Lane, Daddy saved you." Lane's heart clenched. "Yes," she whispered. "He did." And he had done it without hesitation, without calculation, without an ounce of fear for himself. That was what shook her most. Michael glanced at the overturned bucket and scattered cleaning supplies. "We need to move. More might be coming." Coming. While Lane managed, Michael hesitated just long enough for Lane to know he was choosing his words. "That wasn't a random attack," he said quietly. "They were trained, coordinated, and they were, specifically, after you." Lane's pulse drummed in her ears. She tried to steady herself, tried to think. But why I don't even know who. A sharp pain shot up her side, stealing her breath. Michael saw the way her face tightened and made a decision before she could protest. Sit, he said gently. Now. He guided her to a nearby bench, lowering her as though she were made of porcelain. He knelt in front of her, still holding Lily with his other arm, and assessed the injury like someone who'd treated battlefield wounds more times than he cared to remember. You've got internal bruising, he murmured. Maybe worse. Lane blinked at him. How do you know that? Michael didn't answer directly. I'll take care of the swelling for now. He placed his palm carefully against her side. His touch was warm, cautious. Lane hissed, but didn't pull away. Sorry, he murmured. Her voice shook. You move like someone who's done this before. Michael looked up at her, and for the first time Lane saw something vulnerable flicker behind his eyes. A shadow. A memory. A battlefield, maybe. Or a past soaked in silence. I've done a lot of things, he said quietly, none of which I'm proud of. Lily rested her head on his shoulder, sensing something heavier beneath their words. Lane's breathing steadied. Who are you? Michael. His jaw tensed. Before he could answer, a distant alarm beeped faintly from deeper in the facility, an automated system detecting unauthorized access. The attackers had tripped something, or someone else had joined their cause. Michael's eyes hardened. We don't have time for that now. Lane felt fear crawl up her spine. Michael. What's happening? He stood Lily still in his arms and extended a hand to her. Right now, he said calmly. The only thing that matters is getting you somewhere safe. Lane looked at him. The man who moments ago had fought like a ghost, held his daughter like a protector, and tended her wounds with the gentleness of someone who had carried far too much pain for far too long. She took his hand. Okay, she whispered. Lead the way. Michael nodded, once tightened his grip around Lily, and guided Lane down the hallway with purposeful strides. 5 seconds had changed everything. 5 seconds had exposed truths none of them were ready for. And 5 seconds had bound their fates together, whether any of them understood it, yet or not. The emergency stairwell was dim and echoing with the faint hum of ventilation ducts as Michael guided Lane carefully downward. Lily clung to him, her small fingers gripping the collar of his shirt, while her stuffed bunny Hope dangled from her other hand. Lane moved slowly, one hand on the railing, the other resting on the bruised side of her ribs. Her breathing was shallow but steady. She was trained to push through pain. Michael could see it in the way she gritted her teeth, refusing to slow them down any more than necessary. But even determination had limits. Halfway down the second flight, her foot slipped. Michael reacted before instinct even had a chance to warn him. He shifted Lily to his left arm and caught Lane around the waist, stabilizing her with the same controlled strength he had used to take down the 5 men, only this time it was gentle protective. Lane drew a sharp breath. Sorry. I didn't mean to. You need to rest, Michael said softly. She opened her mouth to argue but stopped when she saw the look in his eyes. Not command, not pity. Something else. Something quieter. Concern. Michael helped her sit on the landing, lowering himself to one knee, so he could keep Lily supported while still staying eye level with Lane. For a moment, none of them spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, just heavy. Heavy with questions. Heavy with memories that had begun to stir on their own. Lane looked at him more carefully this time. Really looked. The scars on his hands, the faded bruise on his forearm, the way he scanned the stairwell every few seconds, the way his jaw tightened when he sensed danger. This wasn't a man who had left violence behind untouched. This was a man who had survived it. Finally, Lane exhaled shakily. Michael, how did you learn to fight like that? He glanced away for a moment, as if searching for a version of the truth that wouldn't reopen wounds he'd long tried to forget. "Life taught me," he said, quietly. Lane let out a soft scoff. "Life doesn't teach 5-second takedowns. Military elite training does." Michael didn't respond, but his silence was an answer. Lily leaned her head against his chest, whispering, "Daddy's strong. But he doesn't like fighting." Lane's eyebrows lifted at that. Really, Michael gave Lily a small, almost grateful smile. "Kids don't know how to keep secrets." Lily blinked up at him innocently. "But it's true." Lane softened. "She's right, isn't she? You didn't want to fight them. You just had to." "That's usually how it is," Michael murmured. The stairwell hummed around them, but Lane's mind hummed even louder. Something about him, it wasn't just skill, it was familiarity. A shadow of memory tugging at her from the edges of her thoughts. She studied him cautiously. "This wasn't the first time you saved someone, was it?" Michael didn't answer. His silence stretched long enough for Lane to feel the itch of recognition again. Something buried, something old, something she had forgotten, but her heart seemed to remember. "Can I ask you something?" she whispered. Michael's eyes met hers, calm, steady, but guarded. "You can ask. Have we met before?" His breath caught so faintly she might have missed it if she weren't watching him so closely. Lily looked between them, sensing something shift. Lane leaned back against the concrete wall, wincing at the pain in her ribs, but ignoring it. "I'm serious. When I saw you in the hallway for a second, you felt familiar, like I'd seen you somewhere. Not here, not recently, but years ago." Michael lowered his gaze. Memories he had fought to bury stirred like dust in sunlight. A compound, burning. Smoke curling upward in the night. A small figure with terrified eyes, his arms lifting her, running through chaos and screaming orders. A promise he had kept to himself for 20 years. Get her out alive. Lane's voice grew softer. "It's strange. I've been in the military my whole life. I've met thousands of men in uniform. But the moment you stepped in front of those attackers, something inside me told me you'd done it before. For me." Michael's fingers tightened around the railing. He didn't want this. He didn't want the past clawing its way back into his life. But life had never asked him what he wanted. Lily tugged at his sleeve. Daddy Michael blinked and forced himself to breathe. "Yes, sweetheart. You're thinking loud again." Despite the weight in his chest, Michael let out a quiet chuckle. "Am I?" Lane watched him carefully, gently, like someone trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "Michael, 20 years ago," Lane began slowly, "there was an attack at a military outpost overseas. I barely remember it, but someone carried me out. Through fire, through gunshots. I never saw his face clearly, just his arms around me. His voice telling me I'd be okay." Michael stiffened. Lane continued, her voice trembling. "My parents told me a special operator saved me. They said he disappeared afterward, no name, no rank, just gone. But I've always wondered, always felt like I owed someone my life." Michael's throat tightened. He never expected her to remember. She had been a child, small, frightened, barely conscious. The chaos had been overwhelming even for him. He had carried her through smoke thick enough to choke the world. But she remembered the feeling, the presence, the safety. And now she was staring at him with those same wide eyes. "Michael," she whispered. "Was it you?" Michael closed his eyes briefly. He didn't want recognition, didn't want gratitude, didn't want the ghosts that came with old heroism. He only wanted Lily. Peace. Quiet. A life small enough that no one could take it from him again. But some truths refused to stay buried. He opened his eyes. His voice was low. raw, honest. You were just a little girl, he said softly, and the world was burning around you. Lane's breath hitched. I didn't think you'd remember, he continued. Most people try to forget nights like that. She stared at him, speechless, trembling, overwhelmed because the truth had just been laid bare between them. The stranger who saved her life 20 years ago was the same man who saved her again today. And fate had just brought them together for a reason neither of them yet understood. For a long moment, Lane could not speak. She sat motionless on the cold concrete landing, staring at the man she had spent years, imagining years, wondering about. Years quietly, thanking in her prayers, even though she never knew his name. And now, he was kneeling in front of her, holding his daughter, steadying her bruised ribs, and trying to look like the past he carried meant nothing. But Lane saw it. She saw everything. Michael Hayes wasn't just a janitor. He wasn't a coincidence. He wasn't a passing stranger who happened to be there. He was the reason she was alive, and the reason someone now wanted her dead. Her throat tightened. Why didn't you ever tell anyone, my parents? They spent years searching for the operator who saved me. Michael lowered his gaze, his jaw tightening with regret and restraint. They weren't supposed to find me. Why, Lane whispered. Michael drew a slow breath, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had lived too long in the shadows, of choices he never wanted to make. Because after that mission, my team wasn't supposed to exist anymore. Lane's heart sank. She knew what that meant. Her father, Admiral James Harrington, had once mentioned rumors of ghost units, operators who worked missions that never showed up on paper, men whose names were erased to protect national security, men who were never meant to be thanked, honored, or found. Lane swallowed hard. What was the name of your unit? He shook his head once. It's better you don't know. But she noticed the flicker in his eyes, the same flicker she had seen earlier when he dismantled 5 attackers with machine-like efficiency. A flicker that betrayed the truth he wasn't hiding to protect himself. He was hiding to protect others. Michael. She leaned forward slightly, wincing at the pain but refusing to look away. What happened today? Those men, they weren't ordinary. You said they were trained. Why were they after me? Michael let out a slow, heavy exhale. He didn't want to tell her, but she deserved the truth, at least the part he could safely give. They weren't street thugs, he said. Their formation, the way they moved, how they targeted you, this was planned, coordinated. Lane's stomach tightened. But why I don't have enemies? I've barely been out of basic training the last few months. Michael shook his head. This has nothing to do with who you are now. It has everything to do with who you used to be. Lane blinked, confused. What do you mean you were taken hostage for a reason? Michael said quietly. 20 years ago, the group that attacked that outpost wasn't random. They were part of an organized underground network embedded inside a rogue military contractor. Lane felt her skin go cold. She had heard whispers, just whispers, about corrupted contractors during wartime, but nothing ever proven, nothing ever traced. Michael continued, his voice low and steady. Your parents were high-value targets. Taking you was leverage. If I hadn't moved in when I did... He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Lane felt her chest tremble. So, the attack today is connected to that. Michael nodded slowly. It's a pattern. Their tactics haven't changed, and someone wants to reopen a chapter that should have stayed buried. Lane felt the back of her eyes burn. My parents never told me everything. They always said I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Michael's voice darkened. No, you were attacked because of who they are. Lane leaned her head back against the wall, absorbing this truth that rearranged her entire life. If this was revenge, why wait 20 years? Because waiting is what they do, Michael answered. They disappear. reorganize, strike when everyone least expects it. And you, he looked at her meaningfully. You're the easiest angle to hurt your family. Lane swallowed the lump in her throat. But why were you there today? Why now? Michael hesitated longer than before. Finally, he said quietly, because ghosts don't stay buried forever. Lane stared at him. What do you mean somebody on the inside is pulling strings? He said. Whoever sent those men today, they knew where you'd be. They knew you were vulnerable. This wasn't coincidence. Her breath hitched. An inside leak, highly likely, Michael said. And if they're willing to send trained operatives into a military hospital, then they're getting desperate. Lane's fear sharpened. Desperate for what Michael looked at her, with eyes that carried too many storms, to finish what they started. Lily shifted in his arms, sensing the change in tension even if she didn't understand it. Daddy, are bad men coming again? Michael kissed her forehead. Not if I can help it. Lone watched him, really watched him. The scars, the control, the pain he hid, the protectiveness he couldn't turn off. He was a man who had walked away from the battlefield. But the battlefield had never walked away from him. Her voice softened. You saved me when I was a child. And again today. She swallowed. Why keep protecting me after all these years? Michael's expression didn't change, but his eyes softened with something she couldn't name. Because 20 years ago, he said quietly, I swore I wouldn't let anything happen to you. He paused. And I don't break my promises. Lane's breath trembled. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to thank him, didn't know how to process the revelation that her entire life had been tethered, quietly, invisibly, to this man she barely knew. A man who had risked everything for her. Twice. Finally, she whispered, Michael, what were you? Who were you? Before all this? His answer was a whisper, almost lost in the hum of the stairwell. Someone I promised Lily I'd never be again. Before Lane could ask more, a sudden metallic clang echoed down the stairwell, distant but sharp. Michael's eyes snapped upward instantly. We need to move, he said. Now. Lane pushed herself up, ignoring the pain. She wasn't just following him anymore. She was trusting him. Because if there was one thing absolutely clear, it was that Michael Hayes wasn't a stranger at all. He was the man destiny kept bringing back into her life, and danger was closing in again. The neighborhood where Michael and Lily lived didn't often experience much excitement, just the occasional barking dog, a passing bus, or the sound of distant ship horns drifting from Norfolk Naval Station. It was a quiet, working-class corner of the city. Old brick buildings lined the street, some with peeling paint, some with laundry hanging in narrow yards. Michael preferred it this way, simple, ordinary, forgettable. But on this particular morning, nothing about the street felt ordinary. The rumble reached them first. Low, heavy, rolling like a storm across asphalt. Lane, leaning against the railing outside Michael's small apartment, stiffened. Do you hear that Michael didn't answer? He didn't need to because he recognized the sound instantly. Not cars, not motorcycles. SUV convoy, military grade. Lily sitting beside them with Hope. The bunny perched on her knee blinked up curiously. Daddy, is that thunder? Michael's jaw clenched. No, sweetheart. Stay close to me. The vehicles turned onto the block, and the quiet street exploded into motion, neighbors peeking through windows, dogs barking curtains, lifting. 4 massive black SUVs, rolled-in engines humming with authority. Their tinted windows mirrored the neighborhood like dark, watchful eyes. Lane swallowed. They found us. But Michael didn't move into a defensive stance. Instead, something else flickered through his eyes, recognition mixed with unease. He stepped slightly ahead of Lane, shielding her without thinking. Lily slid off the step and held onto his pant leg, half frightened, half curious. The lead SUV came to a hard stop in front of Michael's building. The back door swung open, and two figures stepped out, both wearing Navy dress uniforms, both carrying the unmistakable presence of command, both radiating a controlled urgency that made the entire street hold its breath. Admiral James Harrington, Admiral Amelia Harrington, the most respected decorated power couple in the U.S. Navy. Lane's breath caught. Mom, Dad. Michael froze. The Harringtons, his former commanding officers, people he had once trusted more than anyone before the mission that erased him, before the Black Ops program that turned him into a ghost, before he walked away for Lily. Admiral Amelia spotted Lane first. Lane, her voice broke with 2 decades of terror compressed into a single exhale. Her usually composed demeanor shattered as she sprinted toward her daughter with surprising speed for a woman in her 50s. Lane pushed past the pain in her side and stepped forward just as her mother enveloped her in a fierce, trembling embrace. Oh, God. We thought Amelia's voice caught in her throat. Are you hurt? What happened? Who were those men? We got the emergency signal, but I'm okay, Lane whispered, though her voice trembled. I'm okay, Mom. Admiral James wasn't far behind, but he didn't embrace Lane immediately. Instead, his eyes swept the surroundings with tactical sharpness, just as Michael remembered. The man had always seen everything, always analyzed, always protected. Then James's gaze locked onto Michael. For a moment, time stood still. Michael held Lily's hand quietly, expression unreadable. James's eyebrows pulled together, disbelief flickering across his controlled features. Haze, he breathed. Michael said nothing. He simply nodded once, a respectful gesture from one soldier to another, despite the years and the unspoken ghosts between them. Admiral Amelia, still clinging to Lane, turned at the sound of that name. Her eyes widened, her breath hitched, and she whispered, as though seeing a ghost, in broad daylight. Michael. Hayes Lane looked between them, confused. Mom, Dad. You know him. James exhaled deeply. Know him. Lane, this man. He stepped closer, voice heavy with awe and something like relief. Is the reason you survived the attack 20 years ago. Lane felt her heart lurch. She glanced at Michael, quiet, humble, unsmiling, and everything inside her tightened at the truth she was only beginning to grasp. Amelia placed a trembling hand to her lips. We searched for you. For years. Your entire unit vanished from records. We were told you were gone, Michael? Michael shook his head. I chose to disappear. James swallowed hard. Why, you saved our daughter. You saved dozens that night. You could have been honored. Honor wasn't going to bring my team back, Michael replied softly. And it wasn't going to give Lily a father who lived long enough to raise her. Lily squeezed his hand at the sound of her name. Amelia's gaze softened, landing gently on the little girl. And this is your daughter. Michael nodded. Lily. Lily hugged Hope tightly. Shy but brave. Hi, she whispered to the admirals. Amelia's eyes glistened. She's beautiful. James took a slow breath, regaining the composure of a man accustomed to commanding warships and entire fleets. Michael. What happened at the hospital? Who were the men who attacked Lane? Michael exchanged a glance with Lane. A silent understanding passed between them. One of shared danger, shared history, shared truth. They're remnants, Michael said, from the same organization that targeted Lane all those years ago. They weren't there for her medical check. They weren't there by chance. This was coordinated. James's face hardened, a commander ready for war. So the past has come back. Michael nodded. And they won't stop, not after today. If they survived, they'd report back. If they didn't, others will come looking. Lane's voice trembled. Dad. They came so close. Amelia wrapped a protective arm around her daughter. Not again. Never again. A long, quiet moment settled over the group, filled with fear, relief, gratitude, and a renewed sense of looming danger. Then James exhaled a decisive breath, turning toward his convoy. All of you come with us. You're under our protection now. We're taking you to a secured zone on base. Lane looked at Michael. Michael looked at Lily. And Lily, brave little heart, beating beneath the morning sun, whispered, Daddy. I trust them. Michael tightened his hand around hers. He looked back at James and Amelia, the admirals who had once commanded his loyalty, his respect, his very life. After a long silence, he nodded. We'll go. And just like that, the past and present collided, pulling them all toward a future none of them could yet imagine, one filled with danger, truth, and a connection 20 years in the making. The Harrington Secured Command Center was nothing like Michael remembered. 20 years ago, rooms like this were filled with static radios, clattering keyboards, and tactical maps pinned to walls. Now the technology hummed with soft blue light screens, layered with encrypted overlays, biometric scanners, and digital feeds tracking every corner of the base. But the feeling was the same. War. Unspoken. Unwelcome. And now sitting squarely on their shoulders. Michael stood with Lily at his side, her small hand gripping his fingers tightly, as she looked around with a mixture of curiosity and nervousness. Lane sat on a medical cot nearby, wrapped in a light blanket, her breathing steadier now. The bruising at her ribs still pulsed, but her mind was sharper than it had been in years. Admiral James Harrington paced the room, his expression a mix of fury and cold determination. Admiral Amelia stood beside her daughter, one hand protectively resting on Lane's shoulder. They had been debriefing for nearly 30 minutes, but only now did James stop pacing and turn to face Michael fully. Hayes, he said, voice low but resonant. I need you to answer this directly. Today's attackers, were they part of the same network from 20 years ago? Michael breathed slowly, his eyes steady. Yes. The room fell still. Amelia tightened her grip on Lane. James's jaw hardened. We dismantled that network. Every operation, every arm, every leader. You were there, I remember, Michael said. But we both know we didn't catch everyone. Amelia inhaled a sharp breath. So what do they want with our daughter after all these years? Michael glanced at Lane, then sighed. Retaliation. Revenge. Pressure. You were the admirals who shut down their funding, exposed their operations, and cut ties with their contractors. They didn't forget. Lane swallowed. And they chose me as the target. To hurt you, Michael shook his head. No. To hurt them. James's eyes darkened, memories of old classified missions threading through his thoughts. But why now? Why wait 20 years? Because they've resurfaced, Michael answered. And someone on the inside is helping them. The room absorbed those words like a punch to the chest. We have a mole, Amelia asked. A leak, Michael said carefully. Someone with access to troop movements, personal schedules, and medical evaluations. Lane was attacked the moment she was alone and unarmed. That's not coincidence. Lane rubbed her temples. I was taught that the safest place in the world was inside a military facility. And yet, Michael stepped closer, lowering his voice. Lane, they weren't after you because you're weak. They were after you because your parents are strong. Lane blinked, taken aback by the simplicity and truth of the statement. James leaned forward. Hayes, what exactly did you see during that original mission? There were parts of the report even we didn't receive. Michael's eyes darkened, not in fear, but in the weight of memory. We weren't just clearing a compound. We weren't rescuing hostages. We stumbled on something else, something bigger. Amelia's voice dipped. How big? Michael met her eyes. A faction inside a private military contractor operating off books, using classified Navy intel to fund unauthorized black operations. Lane's abduction wasn't random. She was leverage. They wanted you two to stand down. Amelia closed her eyes in pain. James clenched his fists. Lane felt her throat tighten. So my childhood trauma wasn't an accident. Michael's voice softened. No, Lane. It was planned. She swallowed hard. And you saved me, because you were ordered to. Something flickered in Michael's expression. Something old. Something wounded. No, he said quietly. I saved you because you were just a child, and nobody else was close enough to reach you in time. Lane looked away, eyes misted. James sighed. We buried that operation. We were told the unit involved didn't survive. He paused. We were told you didn't survive. Michael shook his head slowly. One man survived. Me. And they erased everything else. Amelia's voice trembled. Why did you never come forward? We would have protected you, honored you. Michael glanced at Lily, who leaned into him without truly understanding the gravity of the room. Because after that mission, I learned what happens to men who know too much. I needed to disappear to keep her safe. Amelia's gaze softened. Her mother. Michael hesitated. Gone. Before Lily could walk, Lane's heart clenched. James exhaled deeply. All right. Then this is what we know: the group is back. They targeted Lane, meaning they're sending a message. Michael's involvement means they're escalating. And the leak means they're already inside our walls. Inside your walls, Michael corrected. Not mine. Lane looked at him sharply. You're involved now, whether you like it or not. Michael didn't argue. He didn't even flinch. He knew she was right. James straightened his uniform. Hayes, I know you left the life. I know you swore off operations. But right now, I'm asking you not as your former commanding officer, but as a father, help us protect our daughter. Michael felt something shift inside him. Duty, memory, and something more personal. Something he didn't want to name yet. Before he could answer, Amelia stepped forward. Michael, you saved her once. You saved her again yesterday. If we trust anyone to keep her alive, it's you. Lane's eyes met his, silent, searching, holding 20 years of unspoken gratitude and the faintest glimmer of something new, something fragile. Michael inhaled slowly, then nodded. I'll help, but listen carefully. He looked at each of them one by one. Lane is no longer the only target. They saw me. They know I'm alive, and that means the past isn't hunting just her anymore. Lane blinked. What do you mean? Michael's voice dropped into a quiet, steady truth. They're coming for all of us. Night fell over Norfolk like a velvet curtain pulled slowly across the sky. But inside the Harrington's secured military compound, sleep felt like a foreign concept. Floodlights illuminated the high perimeter fencing, casting long shadows across the ground. The air smelled faintly of salt water drifting in from the distant harbor, mingling with the cold, metallic scent of steel and concrete. Michael stood at the window of the guest quarters assigned to them, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the darkened landscape outside. Lily slept soundly on a cot behind him, Hope the bunny tucked safely under her chin. Lane sat on the edge of another bed, her ribs wrapped and her posture tense. Neither of them had spoken for several minutes. It wasn't silence born of awkwardness. It was the heavy quiet of two people listening to the same invisible danger. Lane finally exhaled. You're watching for movement again? Michael didn't turn. I always watch. You never sleep. When the past comes knocking, he said, sleep is a luxury. Lane studied him. He was a silhouette against the night-broad shoulders, weary posture, watchful eyes. A man who carried his trauma like a soldier, carries his gear silently, efficiently, and alone. You don't have to do this alone, she said softly. Michael kept his gaze outside. I do. Lane shook her head. Michael, after everything today. A faint chirp cut her off. Not through the window, not outside, inside the base. Michael's head snapped toward the ceiling vents. Lane froze, every muscle in her body tightening. It was a sound so soft it could have been mistaken for a glitch in the ventilation system if Michael hadn't recognized it instantly. He spoke without raising his voice. That's not a ventilation echo. That's a bypass signature. Lane blinked, meaning Michael looked at her fully, now eyes sharp, meaning someone just shut down a system they absolutely should not have touched. At that exact moment, the lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then stabilized. Lane's breath caught. Is that normal? No, Michael said. And that wasn't a power issue. That was a reset. He moved quietly across the room, checking the door and the control panel beside it. Lane stood ignoring the ache in her ribs, her instincts warring between fear and military training. Michael pressed his ear to the panel. The faint click of disengaging locks whispered through the metal. His expression hardened. They're inside. Lane's pulse spiked. How this is a secured compound. There's your answer, Michael murmured. It wasn't an outside breach. Lane swallowed. An inside one. Michael nodded. Someone with high-level clearance. Just then, the alarms did not blare. They did not scream. They did not echo through the halls. Instead, a soft, chilling silence spread through the compound, like a house inhaling before collapsing. Lane's skin crawled. Michael, where are the alarms? They're disabled, he whispered. Which means the system isn't compromised. It's been overridden. He grabbed her arm, not rough, not urgent, but with a firm, protective clarity. Stay behind me. Do not make a sound. She nodded. Lily stirred slightly in her sleep, and Michael's expression shifted, softened, and then sharpened again, like a blade being refocused. He checked the hallway through the small reinforced window in the door. 3 shadows moved across the corridor, too smoothly, too silently, to be ordinary patrol. Operatives. Lane's breath shook. They followed us here. No, Michael said. They were already here. Lane's stomach dropped. They infiltrated the base. Michael shook his head. Worse. Someone let them in. Footsteps approached. Heavy. Calculated. The kind of deliberate rhythm used by strike teams, men who needed their boots to speak for them before their weapons did. Lane reached instinctively for her sidearm, only to remember she didn't have one. Her fingers curled uselessly in the air. Michael stepped close enough for his voice to be barely audible. If things go bad, you take Lily, and you run. Do you understand? Lane stiffened. I'm not leaving you. You don't argue with me on this, he whispered harshly. If I have to choose between fighting them and protecting her, I will always choose her. But if you run with her, I can fight with both hands. Lane's eyes shimmered. Michael. Promise me, he said, voice breaking for the first time. Lane's throat tightened. I promise. The footsteps stopped directly outside their door. Michael motioned toward Lily's cot. Lane moved silently and stood over the little girl, placing herself between Hope the bunny and the threat beyond the door. Michael positioned himself just out of the door's center, muscles coiled, mind calculating distances, angles, weaknesses. His breath slowed to that deadly controlled rhythm Lane now recognized as his combat state. A soft, digital chime sounded the kind that preceded an emergency override. The door lock blinked red. Then, yellow. Then, green. The door slid open. Michael exploded into motion. He grabbed the first attacker's arm before the man even registered movement, twisting it at a brutal angle that forced a weapon to clatter onto the floor. The second operative lunged forward, but Michael used the collapsing first man as a shield, shoving him into the second. Lane's heart hammered, but Michael wasn't attacking blindly. He was studying them, evaluating, measuring. The third operative stepped forward, lifting a suppressed firearm. Michael Lane cried. He dove sideways, grabbing the fallen weapon and slamming his elbow into a pressure point in the attacker's leg. The man dropped with a grunt. Michael pivoted, kicking the gun down the hallway. But the fight wasn't clean, not like the hospital had been. These men were better trained, better equipped, prepared for him. Michael ducked a blow, countered another, then winced barely, but Lane saw it. A hit had landed. Hard. She took a step forward. "Michael, stay back," he shouted. She froze, because his voice wasn't angry. It was terrified. Terrified for her. The first attacker lunged again. Michael seized the man's tactical vest and threw him into the wall with a force that shook the frame. The second operative hesitated, now seeing his comrades down, but Michael didn't give him time. 2 swift strikes, 1 final takedown. The hallway fell still. Michael exhaled sharply, holding onto the wall for the briefest second, just long enough for Lane to see the toll it was taking on him. Blood trickled from a cut at his brow. His chest rose too quickly. "Michael," Lane whispered, stepping toward him. He shook his head. They weren't scouts. They were executioners. Lane felt her stomach constrict, meaning Michael looked at her with eyes that carried the truth before he spoke it. "They didn't come to capture you this time." He swallowed hard. "They came to kill all 3 of us." And somewhere deep inside the base, past the locked doors, past the disabled alarms, past the layers of protection, a second team began to move. The inner corridors of the Harrington military compound had never felt so claustrophobic. Red emergency lights pulsed along the ceiling, casting the hallway in a dim glow that made every shadow look alive. The disabled alarms left the air too quiet, an eerie, unnatural hush that made Lane's pulse thrum in her ears. Michael wiped the blood trickling down his brow with the back of his hand. His breathing had returned to its controlled cadence, but Lane could see the fatigue settling into his shoulders. Not weakness. Never weakness, just the raw cost of fighting men trained to kill him. Lily stood behind Lane, clutching Hope the bunny, and trembling but silent as a mouse. Michael had taught her well how to stay calm, how to trust, how to let her father protect her. Michael Lane whispered, stepping closer, "You're hurt." He didn't look at her. His eyes scanned the hallway, as if it were a tactical puzzle only he could see. "I've been hurt worse. That doesn't make it fine." Michael finally glanced at her. Not with annoyance, but with a flicker of something warmer, gratitude, or maybe fear that she might see him as anything less than the shield he needed to be. "I'm okay," he said softly. "But we don't have time." He motioned for them to move. Lane took Lily's hand, and together they followed Michael deeper into the corridor. Every step echoed too loudly. Every flickering light felt like a countdown. At the intersection ahead, Michael halted abruptly and raised a hand. Lane froze. Lily held her breath. Michael's instincts were never wrong. A second later, 2 shadows crossed the adjoining hallway, silent, swift, purposeful. Lane's spine stiffened. Another team. "Not just another," Michael murmured. "This is a kill squad." He did not hesitate. He stepped forward, placing himself directly between the danger and the 2 people behind him. His hands relaxed at his sides, but Lane recognized the posture, centered, grounded, deadly. One of the operatives appeared at the corner. Michael moved first. He surged forward with a quiet ferocity, using the element of surprise as his weapon. His elbow struck the operative's jaw before the man could raise his gun. Another twist, another blow, and the man collapsed. But the second operative was faster. He lunged from the side, aiming straight for Lane. Michael's voice tore through the hall. Lane down, she dropped instantly. The assailant swung where her head had been half a second before. Michael caught the man mid-motion, slamming him into the wall. But there wasn't time to celebrate. A third figure appeared at the far end of the hallway. Then, a fourth. And fifth. Lane's breath hitched. "Michael, I see them." He didn't sound afraid. He sounded resigned, like a man who had been preparing for this fight his whole life. The operatives advanced with military precision, spreading out to cut off exit points. Michael stepped forward, cracking his neck, once an old habit Lane hadn't noticed until now. "Stay behind me." Lane swallowed hard. "Michael, you can't take all of them." He didn't look back. "Yes, I can." The hallway exploded. The first operative charged. Michael sidestepped, grabbed the man's vest, and used his momentum to send him sprawling. The second tried to flank him, but Michael pivoted and delivered a knee to the ribs, a blow so sharp Lane winced at the sound. The third swung a baton toward Michael's temple. Lane screamed. "Watch out!" Michael ducked, just in time, spun behind the attacker, and twisted his arm until the baton clattered away. A swift elbow to the jaw dropped the man where he stood. 3 down, 2 to go. But these last 2 were cautious, watching, learning, adapting to Michael's pattern. They circled him like predators, circling prey, except Lane understood something they didn't. Michael wasn't prey. Michael was the storm. One of them lunged low. The other swung high. Michael blocked the upper strike with his forearm and simultaneously kicked downward, knocking the first attacker off balance. But the second continued, with relentless blows, each more desperate than the last. Michael's movement slowed slightly, a sign Lane didn't miss. He was tiring, not mentally, not in skill, but in muscle and bone. These were battles men weren't meant to fight alone. Lane made a decision before she could second-guess it. She dove forward, grabbed the fallen baton, and swung it at the attacker on Michael's left. The metal connected with a sharp, satisfying crack. The man staggered. Michael seized the moment, his fist colliding with the attacker's jaw. The man dropped instantly. The last operative tried to retreat, but Michael caught his arm and slammed him into the wall with finality. Silence fell. All 5 lay unconscious on the floor. Lane, panting hard, leaned against the wall for support. "You okay?" Michael turned toward her sharply. "You could have been killed." "So could you," she shot back. Something raw flickered across his face. Fear, anger, relief, all tangled. "You shouldn't risk yourself for me," he whispered. Lane stepped closer. "You risk yourself for me every second." Their eyes locked, heavy, unspoken things passing between them. Lily, sensing the moment, tugged at Michael's sleeve. "Daddy, are the bad men gone?" Michael knelt, cupping her face. "For now. But we have to keep moving." Lane steadied herself. Where to? Michael looked down the long, dim corridor, the path ahead filled with unknown danger. "To the central command vault," he said. "If there's a leak inside this base, the evidence will be in that system." "And the mole?" Lane asked. Michael's voice dropped. "We're going to expose him tonight." He glanced at the fallen men. "At any cost." Lane felt a shiver run down her spine, because Michael Hayes was no longer defending. He was hunting. The med bay inside the central vault level was strangely peaceful compared to the chaos that had erupted only hours earlier. Soft white lights glowed overhead, illuminating rows of empty beds. Machines beeped quietly in the background, measuring steady pulses and oxygen levels. It felt like a sanctuary carved out of steel and concrete. Michael sat at the edge of a cot, rolling his shoulder to test the damage. It hurt more than he let on, but the pain grounded him, reminded him he was alive. reminded him he had something worth fighting for now. Lily sat beside him, swinging her legs, Hope the bunny resting in her lap. Her little fingers kept reaching for his hand every few seconds, as if needing to make sure he was still there. Lane watched them from across the room. Her ribs were bandaged, her breathing finally under control, but her heart, that was a different matter. Every time she blinked, she replayed the moment Michael stood between her and an oncoming bullet. Every time she exhaled, she remembered how he shouted for her to stay back, not because he didn't want her help, but because he couldn't bear the thought of her being hurt. Again. She crossed the room slowly, her footsteps soft on the polished floor. "How's the shoulder?" Michael shrugged lightly. "Still attached." Lane gave him a look. "That's not an answer." He softened. "It'll heal." Lily scooted closer to Lane and held out Hope the bunny. "Miss Lane, Daddy says hope helps people feel better." Lane's heart melted. "She does." She knelt and brushed her fingers over the bunny's soft ears. "Well, thank you. I need all the help I can get." Lily nodded solemnly. "Daddy needs help too. He got hurt." Michael chuckled softly. Traitor. But his eyes shone with warmth. Warmth he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Lane stood and looked down at him. "You should lie back." The medic said, "I'm fine, Lane." "No," she corrected gently. "You're tired? And hurting. And human." Michael inhaled, ready to argue, but when he saw the determination in her eyes, something inside him unraveled. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was trust. Maybe it was something he hadn't let himself feel since before Lily was born. He leaned back slightly on his elbows. Lane sat beside him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body, close enough to feel her heartbeat pick up speed. "Michael," she said quietly, "I never got to thank you properly, for saving me back then, for saving me today. You don't owe me anything." "I do," she insisted softly. "I owe you my life twice. And my parents, they owe you their daughter." Michael's jaw flexed with emotion he tried to hide. "You survived because you're strong. You always were." Lane looked at him for a long moment. "You remembered me," she whispered. Michael didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted to Lily, asleep now, with her bunny cradled against her chest. Finally, he spoke. "I tried not to," he admitted. "Not because I wanted to forget, but because remembering made it harder to let go of that world." Lane's voice softened. "You let go for her," he nodded. "She deserved a father, not a ghost." Lane's chest tightened. The weight of what he carried, trauma, guilt, sacrifice, sat heavy between them. She reached out, slowly, carefully. Her fingers brushed his hand. Michael froze, not because he didn't want the touch, but because he hadn't felt one like it in years. A touch that didn't demand, didn't fear, didn't expect him to be perfect or invincible. Just human. "You don't have to be a ghost anymore," Lane whispered. "Not with us." Michael looked at her, and for the first time the guarded barrier in his eyes cracked just enough to let in a sliver of light. "Lane," he said softly, "the world I left behind, it always comes with a cost." She squeezed his hand. "So does love." Michael's breath caught. Lane's eyes widened slightly as she realized the word had slipped out. Not romantic love, not yet, but something close to it. Something growing with each shared danger, each sacrifice, each truth revealed. She looked down, embarrassed. "I didn't mean," Michael gently lifted her chin with 2 fingers. "Lane." Her breath stilled. "You don't have to explain. I understand." Their eyes locked, and the world around them softened. Not vanished, not forgotten, just softened. "Michael," she whispered all those years. "I felt like I was waiting for someone. Someone I didn't remember, but somehow knew. The man who carried me through fire. I always believed he would show up again. He swallowed hard. I never forgot you. Lane's eyes shimmered. Outside, faint echoes of boots and distant commands traveled through the halls, a reminder that danger still lurked. But inside this med bay, the air felt warmer, steadier. A moment carved out from the storm. Michael shifted his hand, lacing his fingers with hers. It felt natural. Right. Inevitable. Lily stirred and rolled, slightly whispering in her sleep. Daddy's here. Lane smiled. She loves you so much. She's all I have, Michael said softly. You have more now, Lane replied, her voice trembling with emotion. You have us. Michael closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing that. When he reopened them, something had changed. A decision. A surrender. A beginning. He brushed a loose strand of hair behind Lane's ear. His touch was gentle, almost reverent. You and Lily, he whispered. You healed parts of me I thought were gone forever. Lane felt her heart shift, warmth blooming in places she didn't know were cold. And you, she said. Voice barely above a breath, remind me what strength really looks like. Michael leaned slightly closer. Not a kiss. Not yet. But the promise of one. A promise that waited for the world to be safe enough to keep it. Just then, Admiral Amelia's voice echoed sharply from the hallway. Michael Lane. We found something, you need to see this. They pulled back slightly, though their hands remained linked. Lane inhaled. Whatever it is. We face it together. Michael squeezed her fingers. Together. They stood ready to follow the admirals. Outside, war waited. Inside, something new had begun to grow. Something fragile. Something powerful. Something worth fighting for. Healing had begun. Sunset draped the Norfolk Naval Harbor in warm gold, reflecting across the calm water like a veil of light. Ships sat anchored in silent rows, giant steel guardians resting after long voyages. Seagulls looped gracefully through the air, their cries soft against the gentle clinking of metal and rope. It was peaceful. Finally. Mercifully peaceful. Michael Hayes walked slowly along the wooden pier, hands in his pockets. Shoulders relaxed for the first time in years. The sea breeze lifted his hair and whispered through the quiet spaces inside him, the spaces he once believed were permanently wounded. Lily bounded ahead, her little shoes, tapping a cheerful rhythm across the planks. Hope the bunny bobbed happily in her hand, now sporting a tiny fabric bandage Lane had added to match Daddy's. She giggled as the breeze caught her hair. Daddy, look. The ships are sleeping, Michael smiled. They are. Even ships need rest. Lily nodded as if this were profound. Just like you, Michael chuckled under his breath. Just like me. Lane walked beside him, slow, steady, stronger now. The bruises across her ribs had faded into softer shades, and the exhaustion that once clouded her features had melted away. But something else had taken their place, something warm, open, hopeful. And every time she glanced at Michael, her chest tightened in a way she no longer feared. Behind them, at a respectful distance, stood Admirals James and Amelia Harrington. They watched quietly, two parents, who had nearly lost what mattered most, only to see her return stronger than ever, and accompanied by the man who had saved her not once, but twice. A rare smile softened James's usually firm features. Amelia's eyes shimmered with emotion she did not hide. Lane slowed and let her arm brush against Michael's. You know, she murmured, I never imagined a future like this. Michael glanced at her, brow raised, walking along a pier at sunset with a kid who thinks ships sleep. Lane laughed softly. No, a future where I feel safe, where I feel like I belong somewhere. Michael looked out at the horizon, the dying sunlight reflecting in his eyes. "You've always belonged. You just needed to find the right people." She nudged his arm gently. "And I suppose you think those people are you and Lily?" He pretended to consider this. "Well, Lily is very exclusive. She only allows good people in her club." Lily spun around excitedly. "Miss Lane is in my club, and Grandma, and Grandpa, and Daddy, and Hope." Michael shook his head with a laugh. "See, very exclusive." Lane's laughter faded into a softer smile. "Michael, I meant what I said. You saved me. Not just my life. You saved the part of me that forgot how to feel safe." He stopped walking. Lane stopped too. The harbor wind swept gently between them, ruffling the edges of their clothes, carrying with it the smell of salt and distant storms long past. Michael looked at her fully. No walls, no hesitation, no shadows dimming his expression. "Lane," he said quietly, "you saved me too. The man I used to be. I didn't like him very much. I didn't want Lily growing up seeing that version of me. You left that world," she said softly. "You built a new one for her." He nodded. "But the truth is, I didn't start living again until the day she was born. And I didn't start healing until the day you walked into that hallway." Lane's breath trembled. "Michael!" Before she could finish, Lily ran between them and grabbed both their hands. "Daddy, Miss Lane." "Come see the water dance." Michael smiled, letting Lily pull him forward. Lane followed, her heart swelling in her chest. The three of them stood at the pier's edge, watching the water shimmer beneath the setting sun. Lily swung their hands back and forth, humming a tune only she knew. Behind them, James approached, hands clasped behind his back. "Hayes." Michael stiffened instinctively. Old conditioning, old hierarchy, old habits. James softened his voice. "Relax, I'm not here as your commanding officer." Michael turned slightly. "Then who are you here?" as James looked at Lane, then at Lily, then back at Michael. "As a father." Michael swallowed. James continued his tone, gentle but resolute. "You saved our daughter when she was a child. You saved her again now. And you protected her with the kind of devotion any parent would pray for." Michael's eyes dropped to the dock. "I didn't do it for recognition." "I know," James said, "which is exactly why you're worthy of being recognized." Amelia stepped forward, resting a warm hand on Michael's forearm. "You gave Lane the chance to have a future, and you gave us the chance to keep our family whole." Michael looked down, humbled. "I just did what was right." Lane slipped closer to him, her arm brushing his again. "You always do." James cleared his throat. "The Navy wants to restore your record, reinstate your honors. Your service deserves." "No," Michael said gently. "Thank you, Admiral. Truly. But those honors don't matter to me anymore. My life, my purpose, is right here." He looked at Lily, then at Lane, and his voice softened. "This is my future." Lane's eyes shimmered. Amelia nodded with understanding. "Then we won't push further." She stepped back, letting the moment return to the three of them. Lily tugged Michael's sleeve. "Daddy." "Yes, sweetheart." She pointed at Lane. "Can she stay with us?" "I like her. She makes you smile." Lane's cheeks warmed. Michael laughed softly. "We'll see," he said, brushing Lily's hair. Lane tilted her head, watching him. "Michael, what do you want now?" He took a slow breath. Then he reached for her hand. Lane stilled, their fingers intertwined, warm, steady right. "What I want," Michael said softly, "is something simple, something I didn't think I could have." Lane's voice was barely a whisper. "And what is that? A family," he said, "with people who make the dark places feel light again." Lane's heart tightened. "Michael." He brushed his thumb over her hand. "If you're willing, I'd like you to be part of that." Lane stepped closer, resting her head gently against his shoulder. I already am. Michael closed his eyes, letting the weight of those words sink deep into the scarred parts of him, the parts he had spent years trying to protect. For the first time in decades, he felt whole. Lily squeezed both their hands. Daddy's here, she whispered with childlike certainty. And now, we're all safe. Michael opened his eyes looking at Lane, then Lily, then the horizon, where the sun finally met the sea. A new beginning, a new hope, a new family born not from blood, but from survival compassion and the quiet miracles of kindness. He tightened his hold on them both. Yes, he whispered. We're safe. The wind carried his words across the water, and the ocean kept them. Before you go, we would truly love to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? Your stories, your thoughts, and even a simple hello mean more to us than you know. This community grows stronger because of you. And if this story touched your heart, inspired you, or simply gave you a moment of peace, we warmly invite you to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing meaningful healing stories to those who need them most. Thank you sincerely for spending your time with us. We appreciate you, we value you, and we hope to see you again in the next story. Take care, stay well, and may kindness always find its way back to you.